Beatrice Winny recently went for a fitness test.
The way that I felt when I was doing it was in pain. It really burns. It hurts your lungs.
Mainly a bunch of timed cardio exercises to gauge what kind of shape she's in.
I did it in a total of 45 seconds. Not too shabby.
Beatrice is 52 years old, but this wasn't your usual I'm getting older, how well am I aging test.
I have no choice but to do the fitness test. This is a requirement in order to gain entry into the Canadian Armed Forces Reserves.
Beatrice works as a graphic designer. She has a close-knit family, teenage son, husband. She lives in a cozy town near Toronto. And she just signed up for the reserves.
One of the most important reasons to me is to stand with my fellow Canadians in the armed forces as a safeguard against the potential threat that we have to the south of the border right now. I don't want to just sit back and wait to see what happens. I am prepared to fight.
How prepared? That's what the Canadian military wanted to know.
I have never held a gun before in my life. I have never wanted to shoot a gun. But at this stage, with what's going on right now for our country and for myself, I'm ready.
Beatrice is ready. She's prepared. What about you? What about the country? Welcome to Gloves Off, a podcast about the threat to Canada's sovereignty and what we can do about it.
And we have a fight!
I'm Stephen Marche. Today we're going to look at maybe the scariest question. How unprepared are we?
And to be honest with you, Canada only works as a state. We don't need anything they have. What I'd like to see, Canada become our 51st state.
This we know. Our greatest friend, our most important ally, our central trading partner, has decided out of a clear blue sky to threaten us. The American threat puts Canada in a great deal of danger. That much has become clear. And nobody saw this coming. During both conservative and liberal governments, we wrapped our political identity and our future around international institutions. The transatlantic security apparatus, the World Trade Organization, the Commonwealth, Francophonie, the rules-based order. And now the rules-based order is crumbling. And as it crumbles, we're forced to confront questions we've never had to ask before. Questions about ourselves and questions about our capabilities. Part of the problem is that we have no history of talking about what Canada would look like standing alone. Until a few months ago, the idea of America as an enemy was science fiction. So what we need is a general assessment. We're going to talk to a range of Canadians, liberals, conservatives, Québécois, Indigenous, views from economists, military experts, and we've asked them basically the same two questions. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? And how would they grade our readiness? We're going to ask them for an A to F score, just like at school. Keep in mind this is a pop quiz, which are the worst kind because they happen without warning, but the bell is rung. We have to pick up our pencils.
We've always played above our strengths when we're confronted with crises of one sort or another. We did that during 2 world wars. We did that during the economic crisis of 2008. We did that through COVID. So I think we're prepared.
Greg Sorbara was finance minister under the Ontario Liberals, a party organizer and, generally speaking, a wise man.
We have a strong, functioning governmental system. We're a wealthy country. You know, we're a member of the G7. We have the resources, we have the economic ability, and we have the financial capacity to reorganize our economy so that it continues to provide for Canadians.
As for weaknesses,
we've become a little bit economically flabby. We've allowed ourselves to rely too much on our ability to sell into the U.S. market. And that has to change. One of the weaknesses that this country has been confronted with from day one is regionalism. We saw that, my goodness, the battle during the Second World War over conscription. We see it when Quebec has referenda about sovereignty. We have seen it recently in Alberta. But the Canadian people have always outperformed when the going gets tough. And so let us put aside our regional differences. let us put aside our particular idiosyncrasies and unite as a nation and help the government to define a path. And once that path is defined, get behind it so that we can work together as a strong and united country, because in the end, that's what we are.
So, according to the ranking liberal in the room, what grade does Canada get? Prepared or unprepared?
I would get the same marks I always got in law school, B+. Not quite A. I mean, we're not perfect. We're going to suffer. There's no doubt about that. China's going to suffer. Europe's going to suffer. Fortunately, I think that the greatest amount of damage will be done in the U.S. itself, and Canada will survive and thrive when this is all over. So B+.
B+ isn't a bad start. But of course, Greg has his reasons for giving that grade. He's a liberal, a well-connected one, and the Liberals have been in power for 10 years. We need another point of view.
Look, I think that there was a long period of time leading up to Trump's tariffs that our sovereignty was in question. I think the political leadership in our country was sorely lacking. I think Canadians are afraid.
Lisa MacLeod is a former 6-term member of the Ontario PCs. She's a former provincial cabinet minister, and she ran Pierre Poilievre's first campaign. She's our conservative.
I put a video out and it went sort of viral on TikTok, and it was really a letter to Donald Trump talking about Canadian women and the strength. And, Laura Secord to Haley Wickenheiser to Danielle Smith to Kim Campbell, people that are very different. Viola Desmond creating the first civil rights movement in North America. She was Rosa Parks before there was a Rosa Parks. Like, these are women who have blazed a trail. And I think that Canadian women together are collectively are showing their strength. And I think as a result of that, the collective will of the people of Canada will ensure its sovereignty.
If will is what we have, that doesn't seem like a lot to me.
That said, we are not immune to some of the changes that are happening a lot of changes in the economy. The disruption by Donald Trump worldwide has left the markets very fragile. The other area where we must be strong is in the Arctic. And I think, our border, despite it being an open border, there's always been a level of safety and security through our partnership with the United States. And so it's going to be up to the political leadership to determine how we invest and how we continue to protect the country.
Lisa held many different portfolios during her time in the Ontario Tory cabinet, one of which was as tourism minister.
People are going to Napa when they should be going to the Okanagan, or they could be going to Cape Breton. I think repatriating that money, but then also at the same time going out to the rest of the world and saying, look, if you want a North American experience in business, in leisure travel, in bringing your professional gaming or hockey team or whatever to this side of the world, the safer, more economical, and better diversified workforce is here.
So here we have a few pros and cons from Poilievre's first campaign manager. Where do we land? What's the grade?
Well, I guess I would have to give it grades per issue, right? I would say an F for defense readiness and border control. I would say A for us becoming a unified country at the drop of a hat, knowing what's important and what's at stake. I would say, depending on the province, the readiness that we would have with our manufacturing facilities. So on the whole, it would probably be a B-.
So we're still in B land. B+ from Liberal Greg Sorbara, B- from conservative Lisa MacLeod. That F from her for defense is troubling, though, because defense, rather than national spirit, is what saves countries from occupation. Part of the problem I have with both these grades is that politicians, whether liberal or conservative, have a natural tendency to overrate public opinion. We've all seen public opinion change. We've all felt the rise of national spirit. That's why you're listening to this show. That's why we're making it. Canada has had one of the most unifying events in its history. Literally, the last time the country was this united was during the American Civil War, when a leak from Lincoln's Secretary of State proposed annexing Canada. We confederated then. But ever since Confederation, we've been reconsidering whether it was the right idea. I mean, Canada has nearly dissolved twice in my lifetime. Once in 1980 during the first Quebec independence referendum, and again in 1995 when it came within a percentage point.
Quebec is joining the rest of Canada in its resistance towards Donald Trump. It has brought Quebec and Canada, French Quebec and English Canada, closer together to a certain extent, in the sense that we are all facing in the same direction.
Francine Pelletier is a legendary Quebec journalist and documentary filmmaker whose work has bridged the gap between English and French Canada for 30 years. She's never seen that division the way it is now.
The position has been, even from the separatists, to say that we have to face the crisis in the only way we know how. That is, we have to play tough. We have to stand up to Donald Trump. And I haven't heard unity come out of their mouths, but essentially that's what it comes down to. We're much more unified now in this crisis than we were, for example, during COVID, where everyone was pulling in their, the cart in their own provincial direction. And certainly that was true in Quebec.
I like the sound of that phrase, "was true."
The general weakness of Quebec, and this is the thing that I think until recently English Canada didn't understand very well, is that it has an extreme cultural frailty in terms of its position within North America. I mean, here the expression is, we're like a cube of sugar beside a gallon of coffee. English Canada is also feeling the pinch of the fear of survival. They understand suddenly what it means that maybe things are not going to continue as we've always assumed they would. But that makes our vulnerabilities very different. For the English-speaking Canada, it's the polar opposite. English Canada's vulnerability is being too much like the United States.
This is a great distinction. Now it is English Canada who is vulnerable to being swallowed by the global hegemon.
For the first time, I think, and this is very much a plus, we understand the same things at the same time. It's a rare moment in French-English relationships within Canada.
There's that word again, relationships. But, okay, what grade is the country receiving from Quebec?
As far as Quebec is concerned, I would say A, for all the reasons mentioned. Quebec has fought for its cultural survival since, the Plains of Abraham. That's over 250 years. It won't stop now.
So, an A from Quebec. That's pretty damn impressive. Who would have thought that Quebec would rally around the maple leaf? But Quebec is only the most prominent fracture in our country. At the heart of the question of our sovereignty is the question of the sovereign nations within our country, the indigenous, the people we annexed. And that has been the most intractable problem for Canada. Our original sin, if you will.
I would give it a B right now, but I think it would be upgraded to probably an A plus once the Prime Minister kind of indicated how he wants to address the whole issue of minerals and industry, and how that we're not going to allow international companies to come in and take billions of dollars in profit and walk out the door when we have communities right across the road that don't have proper living conditions or clean water.
Rodger Redman is the chief of the Standing Buffalo in Saskatchewan. When we spoke to him a couple of months ago, he was hopeful. Prime Minister Carney had indicated he would restructure Canada's resource economy to benefit, in part, Indigenous people. Standing Buffalo identifies as a sovereign First Nation within Canada. They've had a long-standing relationship with our sovereign. That's how they look at it.
We go back to the relationship we had with the British Crown, specifically 1763 and the War of 1812. We were there as allies with the British Crown, making that ultimate sacrifice. Even today, we're working with them on operationalizing our trade corridor to fight the tariff war.
So this was all good news. Unity, hope for the future, economic growth. But then Carney introduced Bill C-5, legislation that will fast-track energy, infrastructure, and mining projects.
Right now, I'd probably give them a D- because of the fact that the way they're going about implementation and not being upfront with the First Nations. Obviously, the government is still taking the same approach as the structure of executive federalism, top-down approach, and that the First Nations are going to be under the legislation, and that there's no parity there. They say, "Oh, you've been consulted. We've consulted you, and that's all we need to do." And you got to deal with the rights holders.
Many Indigenous groups are skeptical about the consulted part. They know what Canadian consultations have been worth in the past.
You're not dealing with the environmental impacts properly, especially when you're talking about uranium and these oil spills. There's one up north in northern Saskatchewan right now that you can't get a hold on. It's this pressurized gas coming out of the ground, and First Nations are having to breathe that in.
The issue for Redman isn't just about the relationships in the land. It strikes at the heart of what Canada is.
And that's the thing, fast-tracking these projects is to deal with the economic impacts of the U.S., but at the same time, you're also disregarding the democracy, the democratic foundation of the country in this process.
So our original sin is still firmly in place, and it looks like the redemption we hoped for during the Trudeau years will not be achieved, if indeed it ever could have been. If we're not careful, the Canadian spirit, the national unity we had at the moment of Trump's threats, will fracture as we move into actually trying to do things about those threats. But countries don't survive by spirit. They survive by money and force. So what about the money? That's what Trump has claimed he's coming for. He claims he wants to soften us up economically to take us over politically.
What happened after Trump cut corporate tax rates in 2018? He went from 35% to 21%. And what did Canada do in its infinite non-wisdom? Nothing. No response whatsoever.
This is David Rosenberg, the founder and president of Rosenberg Research in Toronto. He used to be chief North American economist for Merrill Lynch, and he's what I would describe as an extremely practical man.
For all the talk over the years about how Canada should diversify away from the United States, we've heard about as much on that as we heard about breaking down these inter-economic barriers. To put it in number terms, we export 20%, a fifth, of our GDP, our annual economic output, to the United States. The United States, they export less than 1% of their economy to Canada. So you see this relationship with the U.S. in terms of the economic relationship is completely lopsided. It's always been lopsided. No one ever said it was going to be fair, but we are tremendously exposed. We're more exposed than any other country in the world.
It's a lopsided relationship. Everybody knows that. Do we have any leverage? Is there anything that will prepare us for what's coming?
Over and beyond, say, a well-educated and diverse population and a deep manufacturing base. And we also have one thing that the Americans do need, which are critical materials, critical minerals. We've always had this, but right now, I think the United States probably needs all this stuff even more. It's why, for example, they're going after Greenland. Canada is Greenland on steroids. When you think about all the natural resources that we have in this country, and that's really, if you're asking me what our cutting edge is, our strength really is in the fact that we're so rich in natural resources. We have cobalt, we have uranium, we have natural gas, we have nickel, we have 7% of the world's fresh water. We have 30% of the world's timber. We have 10% of the world's proven oil reserves.
Canada is Greenland on steroids. Love it. That's got to mean something when it comes to our score, right?
I hate to give out failing grades, so I guess I'll go to a D-. How's that?
D- is what my parents used to describe as disappointing.
We never really diversified our international trade channels. We've done some, but not nearly enough. But I think that it was a big mistake for former Prime Minister Trudeau to poke Donald Trump in the eyes. And whether justified or not, whether provoked or not, Justin Trudeau never really showed much respect to Donald Trump. And, I work in an industry, the financial industry, where this term KYC is omnipresent. Know your client. And Donald Trump is the world's most important client. And we have to understand what his reaction function is and his behavior.
So, When it comes to things that aren't feelings, we're at D-, according to the former chief economist for Merrill Lynch Canada. Even scarier is the question of military force. Almost no one in this country has ever thought about what our readiness looks like when it comes to military conflict with the United States. Philippe Lagassé, a professor of international affairs at Carleton University, is one of the few who have.
I would say the biggest weakness right now is personnel. And that's really the biggest shortfall that we're seeing, is that the military is short about 16,000 people.
16,000 people sounds like a big shortfall.
And so it's facing two types of struggles. The first is retention. So when you train somebody in Canada, you really build them up to be somebody who's very attractive for the private sector. We tend to build people up. They become very experienced. And so the first challenge you have is keeping people in. And the second challenge that you have is not so much getting people in the door in a recruitment center, so we can get them in. We just have trouble training them and processing them in time before they look elsewhere and, just get impatient and leave.
The image of the Canadian Armed Forces as a revolving door institution isn't very comforting. But what about when we have to stand and fight?
We're a fairly high-end military when it comes to doctrine, for instance. So we're very good at war fighting itself. And you see this, for instance, one of the reasons the Canadians, alongside the British, trained Ukrainian forces prior to the full-on Russian invasion, and the reason that was the Ukrainians were able to adapt so well and so effectively is that they've been trained for years by British and Canadian and other forces. We also have some higher end capability, but in small quantities. So we have a lot of quality in the Canadian military. We're just not a very quantitative military, right? So we have a very deep knowledge. It's just not very wide.
Quality over quantity kind of maybe cancel each other out, but let's get down to it. How ready are we?
At the moment, it's not great. And the reason that the readiness isn't great is threefold. The first is we spent about a generation, basically from the mid-1980s to about 2015, 2017, only replacing select things in the armed forces. So we let a number of capabilities age. So as a result of that, you'll see numbers coming out and saying the serviceability of the Canadian Armed Forces major fleets is like hovering like at 40 or 50%. And we're lacking the technicians to maintain it. And the Navy, we have some new ships coming online. So these Arctic offshore patrol ships that are now almost, the build of that is almost complete, where we have 2 temporary supply ships for the Navy. That's then also being replaced as part of the recapitalization of the Navy that's going on. On the Air Force side, we acquired new transport planes in the mid-2000s. So we have these big strategic lift aircraft, and we have tactical lift aircraft. We've got some very good tactical helicopters, but they're also getting old. The Army has a bunch of truck fleets that are just rusting out that really need to be replaced. Like, that's a big challenge, is just simple things like trucks and recovery vehicles. And finally, the infrastructure piece in Canada is one that we can't ignore. So there's a lot of older buildings and older sites that have not been taken care of as they should have. I should note, though, that since 2017, we have seen a major recapitalization of the armed forces underway. So we're spending upwards of like $250 billion over the next 20, 30 years to replace the military.
So basically, I'm driving a 20-year-old Hyundai, not that there's anything wrong with that, and my neighbor has a fleet of Lamborghinis.
I'm going to say right now it's a C, but we're working towards a BB plus, right?
I do not like this C grade. This C grade scares me. It's true that Carney has made deals with European military partners and promised to up the military budget to 5% of GDP, which is a huge number. But when you consider this grade in the context of David Rosenberg's grade, a D-, we have a situation where economic weakening is not only possible, but likely. And we have very limited military options. So, a mixed bag here. Grades ranging from a D- to even an A. But let's be clear about where the high grades and the low grades were. The high grades were for national spirit. The low grades were for practical application. Our best grades are in the least important subjects. It's like we're doing well in dance and phys ed, but not in math and English. And the overall average is a lackluster B-. Right now, Canada's like a good student, an intelligent, earnest, hardworking student who's willing to put the effort in, isn't enough of an embarrassment to be kicked out of school, but who is close to flunking out when it comes to the subjects that matter. We're talking about global politics now. We are genuinely vulnerable. Our survival is at stake. There is no A for effort. We have to start moving now. But there's one source of hope in these lousy grades. At least all the people we spoke to from these different perspectives are operating under the same assumption. We need to disentangle ourselves from the US economically, militarily, socially, culturally, politically. We may not have done well on this test, but we know what we need to study for next time. We need to get out of the America business and fast. Let's just hope the real test isn't too soon. When that real test comes, Beatrice Winny, the patriot who signed up for the reserves at the age of 52, will be ready, and she won't be alone.
I've had a lot of questions recently from other people in social media platforms who are asking me, what was it like to join? What's the process? How did you get information? So I think there's a lot of curiosity from other people out there who are even my age, who want to contribute in some way. I tell them a little bit about my experience of enrolling, and I'm hopeful that they, in their curiosity, will see that it's not impossible.
In the spirit of getting ready, we're going to get real practical, real fast here. Next episode, Gloves Off will look at the war we're already engaged in. The economic war, the tariff war with the United States. The biggest questions: how can we fight against an economy that's 10 times our size? Can we even escape the economic order if we wanted to? And what would that look like? We need new ideas. The old ones no longer hold. This is Gloves Off. Let us know what you think wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Stephen Marche. Thank you for listening.
The old relationship we had with the United States is over.
The true north is indeed strong and free.
Canadians are always ready when someone else drops the glass.
Oh, Canada, 51st state.
51st state.